Following on from 2022, 2023 seemed to be a bit of a slow year to get going in terms of 4K disc releases, but towards the end of the year there was a whole slew of releases that seemed to come one after the other, and in the end I think it turned into yet another very good year. So let's take a look back at some of the releases that came out this year. In other words, some of those I just happened to purchase and take a look at. I'm quite often asked to review certain 4K releases, and this year, even though it's only recently out, the most common request has been for the 4K of Titanic. I must admit that I'm not actually ready to watch that film again just yet. This is the PAL Laserdisc of Titanic. The image quality of this full Laserdisc is exceptional, as was the 70mm blow-up print that I saw at the Odeon Leicester Square. Now, this was shot Super 35 for just about all of it except the underwater sequences, which were shot Techniscope, which is only 2 sprocket high, 35mm, produces an aspect ratio approximately 2.35 to 1, and the Super 35 will have been optically reduced to the same aspect ratio, and from there would have been release prints done in the full frame anamorphic. Now the 70mm blow up that I saw would have been struck directly from the negative, as will be the 4K release discs. Now, given how they were shooting it, I think that James Cameron and his cinematographer, director of photography, would have chosen the finest grain film stock they could find. So they would have used Kodak 500T or something like that, and that would have been used to give real fine grain, a really good image. So those blow-ups into full frame anamorphic 35mm release prints would have still looked as good as possible. That's probably going to prompt people to say that on the 4K there has been too much image noise reduction applied. That may not necessarily be the case. You've always got to consider how these films are filmed and how they're produced. So something to bear in mind if you think perhaps that this print of Titanic looks a little too clean, considering it was only Super 35 and Techniscope may not be the case. Now, at the end of 2022, there were 2 noteworthy releases that would have been in my best of review of 2022. They were Walter Hill's The Driver with Ryan O'Neill, who sadly died recently, 1978, and the 1971 Silent Running. If I'd have got these in time for 2022, I'd have done reviews of them then, but I had to wait a while. But these would have been in that roundup, and if you haven't seen either of these, then well worth a look. Probably would have featured in the top 10 for 2022. Then there was another title that I'd had many requests to review during 2022, but it was only available in America as a 4K, the Criterion release of Brian De Palma's Blowout. What a fabulous film, what a fabulous disc. This might have rivaled Get Carter for #1, it's that good, but it's an overall package thing with me. What is the best package of the year, really? It doesn't have to be the best image quality, the best sound. There's something about, is it something that the collectors would want? And Get Carter was a standout for me last year. Anyway, the Rocky series then started getting the 4K releases. It was the first 4 films at first, but as I've got them all on Blu-ray, I didn't want to get the whole lot again. It's the first film that I think is great, and I did a review of this early in the year. What a lovely steelbook. If you love the Rocky films, even if you like the Rocky films or you like historic films, this is a beautiful 4K that once again is just like having your own personal 35mm print. One I purchased in FOP when I was in FOP earlier this year in central London, the steelbook of Don't Worry Darling. I didn't know anything about this film, but I knew it was out. It was a new release. There weren't many new releases at the time, and I always like to support the new releases because I feel if enough of us do that, then we're going to get more new releases, aren't we? We'll keep the collections growing and keep the releases coming out for all of us. This turned out to be another remake of The Stepford Wives for me. It might not be entirely that, but that was my take on it, so wasn't really the most interesting film, although it was still rather interesting. I don't think it's one of the best releases of the year, but a lovely steelbook, and I'm very pleased to have it. And at the same time, because a lot of people were asking me to review this one, I also purchased Training Day, which it turned out I'd never seen it. Did a full review of this. I don't think it's the best thriller ever made, but it's an enjoyable film. I thought the first hour was better than the second hour. I think a lot of people probably feel the same way. But if you were a teenager or a 20-something when you first saw this, I think it's going to be one of those must-haves for a lot of people. Another Arrow release that came out around the same time, The Last Emperor. What a lovely pack this is. It's another lovely looking 4K, just like having your own 35mm print. I'd never actually seen this film either, somehow managed to avoid this all the years. And there's one sequence in this that's haunted me ever since, with the young communists going along a street in a town and bullying the older people, things like that. A great film. I'm not sure it's one that I want to watch too often, but a lovely pack from Arrow. It's just great to have. Flashdance came out with this lovely steelbook option. The climax of the film, well, she's in it because of her dancing ability, and the climax of the film is when she does this dance, and it used to form the video for Irene Cara's video to the theme tune What a Feeling. And although I don't consider this to be a particularly great film, just that the dance sequences alone are just magical. Some of the atmosphere to it. I didn't feel that her boyfriend in this was entirely believable, and in fact Keith at Euphoria Pictures found exactly the same thing with it. So it's interesting how we often get the same conclusions, but not always. But that's a lovely steelbook to have, and as I said, I just feel like I've got to support these new releases. Superman came out on 4K a few years ago, and well, I had a big debate really about the opening couple of reels of that, or was it the opening reel, because it's all a bit washed out, but that was how it was shot, went into detail. Anyway, Superman 2, I picked that up while I was in FOP again, and this is a very nice release. It's got two versions of the film on there, the so-called Richard Donner cut and the theatrical version. My opinion is it's interesting to see the Richard Donner cut, but clearly a bit of a lash up, whereas the original theatrical version, I loved it when I saw it when I was a youngster. I still love it today. And even though now I think Superman the movie is the better film, at the time I thought Superman 2 was, but I still think this is a great sequel to a great film. So you can get Superman 1 to 4 in a box set now, and I believe they've even remastered Superman the movie, and people tell me it's even better than that first 4K release. Now then, The Changeling. Second sight, but if I remember correctly, this was done from the Severin master, so there was some collaboration there with Severin over in the USA. Second sight did actually send me the review disc for this, but that was a Blu-ray, and although I could see a great film in there, I wasn't that impressed with the Blu-ray. So I thought, if I'm going to do a review of this, I need to get the 4K. So I got in touch with Second Sight and was able to buy from them slightly early the special edition pack, and what a release this is. Absolutely fabulous. It comes with a book, the pack with the discs in it, and some miniature reproductions of the front of house lobby cards. The book is fairly substantial, so it's not what you would call a booklet. Then the media pack, it's got the Blu-ray, which is not particularly impressive, but then the 4K, what a revelation. Your own personal 35mm print again, and it reveals the great film that The Changeling is. One of those horror movies that's more a ghost psychological thriller than a horror movie, and keeps you intrigued from start to finish, but it certainly helps when you've got the image quality of this compared to the Blu-ray. But in addition in here, and this is what makes a difference to this, because the soundtrack comes on a CD, and the music in this is just beautiful. The piano, George C. Scott as the lead actor, just a wonderful all-round package. So no prizes for guessing where that one may end up in my end of 2023 top 10. For me, Deep Impact is probably the best disaster movie ever made. I just love it. I did from the moment I saw it, and it's a real treat to have such a lovely home video, really, a 4K disc of this quality. If you haven't seen Deep Impact, well, I dare say there are quite a few people that don't like it, but for most of us prepared to suspend disbelief, I think you're in for a treat. And then I thought I'd have a look at one I loved when I was younger, Schwarzenegger in The Running Man. This was, well, in the end it was directed by Paul Michael Glaser, who I loved in Starsky and Hutch when I was a boy, and combine him with Arnold Schwarzenegger and the rest of the cast in this. Yaphet Kotto, of course, best known for his performance in Alien. I just love this film. It's a grainy film, it always was, so not the best looking 4K you're ever going to see, 185:1 if I remember correctly, the aspect ratio, but a real treat to have it in such a good quality home video. Who would have thought we'd ever get that in such quality for, at the time, £19.99. Then another one a lot of people asked me to review, the fourth instalment of John Wick. When I went to get this, I was hoping to get the 1 to 4 pack, but unfortunately, where I went, the HMV I went to, they didn't have any of those, so I just came home with John Wick Chapter 4 and watched that. I thought it was overly long. I think Keanu Reeves' character in this would have been dead about a dozen times in it if you weren't prepared to suspend disbelief. But if you love these action films, then this does look great. It sounds great. You'll be in for a treat. But I'd have preferred it to be 2 hours and maybe not quite so action driven and a bit of story. But to be fair, you've got to have seen the first films, and Keithy Euphoria Pictures actually sent me over, well, John Wick Chapters 1 and 2. I thought Chapter 1 was really good. I enjoyed Chapter 2, but Chapter 1 I thought, well, very good. And he also sent me John Wick Chapter 3. So I caught up, and I do see why people love them now, because it's a modern action film, isn't it? And I loved all those Schwarzenegger films and everything else in the 1990s. The Firm was another worthy release. I'd only ever seen this at the cinema at the Empire Leicester Square, where it looked great, as they always did at the Empire. Must have been those projectionists there, always at the top of their game with the best prints. But The Firm, I really enjoyed it. I always avoided getting the PAL Laserdisc because I didn't think it would be that repeatable, and I'm glad I did avoid it because I was able to get the 4K and watch it anew. Thoroughly enjoyed it. A very clean looking print, and I can remember it being a fantastic print of the Empire, so it's no surprise to see it looking so good on 4K home video disc. The Rocky series continued with the Creed series, and Creed 3 came out, and because it was in the same format steelbook as the Rocky steelbook, I thought I'd have the steelbook and do a review of that. Turns out Creed 3 is not a particularly popular film, but I enjoyed it. The boxing action was terrific as usual, and I'm very pleased to have it in this beautiful steelbook. Steven Spielberg had a new film out in 2023, and it's a bit of a biopic, really. It's called The Fabelmans, but it could just as well be called The Spielbergs. It's more or less the story of his life, and the conclusion of this, where he goes to meet John Ford, is the topper for the film. Just wonderful. And if I tell you the chap playing John Ford is David Lynch, I think there'll be many people who want to see The Fabelmans just for that. Another beautiful 4K disc release, and one that I'm very pleased to have in this thin case and the thin slip cover. But what more do you need? The Truman Show. Another beautiful 4K. They are really turning them out now. I didn't see this one at the cinema, but I do have the trailer on 35mm. It's very fine grained, very pristine looking, and this disc release matches it very closely. I had a few requests to review Babylon, so when I saw it in HMV, I thought, right, I'll give that a look. And it's a beautiful looking 4K. It's shot entirely on video, but they've put that digital film grain in, and it does look just like a film. Fantastic achievement. But the film wasn't for me. It was a bit like soft porn in places, really. Sort of the early Hollywood, just before the sound era comes in, then it does come in. And around that time, there was a scandal with Fatty Arbuckle, who was one of the most popular silent comedians. He was accused of doing something at a party that was never, don't think it was ever even taken to court. And I think this is largely based on that sort of thing. So I thought afterwards, the word to describe this is depraved, which is going too far, but that was how I felt at the time. So not exactly one of my favourite films of the year. But what I did think was very good was the 4K of Plane. I thought that was just a wonderful, fun film. And Gerard Butler, well, he's always good, isn't he? And then one of the biggest releases of the year that was anticipated when I did my end of 2022 roundup, The Exorcist. Now, this caused a bit of controversy, which is always good because it gets conversation going. A lot of us thought the colour in this was too rich. ever since I watched this on 4K disc, I've been reining the colour in on my video projector. So by the time I get that to something where I think it's maybe more accurate than it should have been, I'll give this another look and I'll see if I still think it's too vibrant. But the one sequence where Reagan is on the bed during the exorcism and there's green bile just running out of her mouth, well, on this it looked almost luminous, which I thought that cannot be right. I do have it on Super 8, the Warner Brothers release, the 3x400 foot and the 400 foot cut downs, and the colour is far more muted. So this may not be entirely accurate, but without a 35mm master print that's somehow unfaded from 1973-74, there's no way to be sure. This may be how it looks, but I don't think so. But to see The Exorcist looking so pristine, you know, you can't really complain. £20, and you get 2 4Ks in here and 2 Blu-rays, but one of each of those discs is the so-called director's cut. But I think I've known that film for too long and too well that I only want to see it as I remember it, as the great film that it truly is. This one was probably the biggest surprise of the year, The Flash. I wanted to see it because Michael Keaton comes back as Batman. For me, he is Batman. He was perfect in that role, and the 1989 film has never been surpassed. I was expecting this to be a complete load of tosh, which, to be fair, I suppose it is. But the young man who plays the Flash in this, I think he's brilliant. Unfortunately, there's been some controversy in his life, and he was out of favour, and people tell me that's why they didn't want to see the film. But I watched it on this 4K disc. I had seen the trailer at the BFI IMAX. A bit of the trailer I saw, I thought, oh goodness, that looks absolutely awful. But what a surprise. I couldn't believe how much I enjoyed this. Yes, it's a load of nonsense. A lot of people really genuinely do not like it, but I thought it was terrific. So I was very pleased that I got it in this beautiful steelbook in the end. And another one that was a nice surprise. Now, didn't get much coverage this, but Adam Driver in 65. It's a dinosaur film actually set 65 million years ago. So how is he there? Well, has he gone back in time or what? You'll have to watch it to find out. I probably enjoyed this more than any other dinosaur film I've seen, including Jurassic Park, and I own a Super 8 print of that, which tells you that I must like that film somewhat. So I had a thoroughly great time with that. So did my wife. And they just kept on coming this year. And another surprise, because the others, I've loved this film since it first came out. I think it's one of the best ghost stories ever committed to film, and the look and the feel of this is just beautiful. And it's all here on this 4K disc without HDR, even though the back of this does no HDR. It's a mistake on the box, so don't take any notice of that. But as a result of that, when I put this on, and I always go to adjust the HDR because I like to check everything before we watch it so that we get the best out of it, and it was telling me there was no HDR. I thought Studio Canal had just made an awful mistake and it was going to cost them a lot of money. But we watched the film on 4K, and I was looking at it and thinking, does this actually need HDR? Because to me, it looks just like my 35mm trailer. And so afterwards I put the Blu-ray on and I thought, I'm imagining this. The Blu-ray does not look as good as the 4K. So I was backwards and forwards, and indeed I've been eating humble pie ever since. 4K does not necessarily need HDR, like I've been telling you over the past almost 4 years, and this one I think proves it. So there you are, lesson learned. Criterion, Martin Scorsese's After Hours from the 1980s. What a wonderful film. It was one that people asked me to take a look at. Otherwise, I really wouldn't have even considered it. I'm so pleased sometimes when people badger me to do a review, because I thought this film was brilliant. I just loved it, and watched it with Trevor and his wife from Double Bill Movies when they came over, and the four of us sat in there. We had a night in the cinema, and I think we had a great time all together. And is it one that people would buy and keep? Trevor didn't think so, but I do. I think this is one I could watch many times, and I probably will over the years. So another great 4K release. And then one of the biggest of the year, even though it was considered not to be that successful in the box office, Mission Impossible 7. Now, this lacks a villain, which I think is the overall problem with it. The villain is a computer. It's artificial intelligence, so hopefully I haven't given too much away there, but I think if you're prepared for that, it might actually come across better, because there are villains in it that are working for the AI. Or is it AI? Is it going to turn out to be a villain behind? Had the mistake of having part 1 on the end of the title. That seems to have hurt it at the box office too, but I think as another action adventure with great sound on 4K disc, it's one most people should enjoy. And then another controversial release, American Graffiti. I mentioned Techniscope earlier. This was shot in Techniscope, 1973, George Lucas. What are you going to do if you're going to have to shoot low budget? Let's halve the cost of the negative stock, shoot it Techniscope, and then we can do blow-up prints afterwards, anamorphic full-frame blow-up prints. So to do that, you're going to select the finest grain film stock, negative stock, that's available, shoot on that, and then you can get away with blowing them up to full frame anamorphic. That is what I think has confused people with the image noise reduction claims of American Graffiti, because I can see the film grain, all the detail everywhere, and I just think it's a great video transfer. Being Techniscope, it's not going to be 4K, it's just one step up from 16mm, so you're probably looking at around 3K resolution there, 2.8K, something like that. So don't expect that to look like Oppenheimer, which was shot in a combination of genuine IMAX 15-70mm and standard 70mm, bit of Super 35 in there as well, I believe, but overall this is a genuine IMAX and 70mm film, and as hopefully just about all of us know by now, if you start with the best movie making formats to shoot with, then whatever you shrink it down to, even something, well, a fraction of the size of those original film frames as this is, a fraction of the size, you're still going to end up with one of the best, and I think this is one of the best 4K discs. It might blow your subwoofer up at times with the explosions, but it's a drama, so it's different to Tenet, Dunkirk and Interstellar, even the Dark Knight films that went before it. But critically, probably Christopher Nolan's best film, but I prefer the previous three, simply because I think that for an IMAX is what I want to see. I want to see these action adventures, but it was a cinematic event to see this drama at the BFI IMAX. One of the highlights of the year for sure. Where will that come in the top 10? It's not all just based on image and sound quality. This came out earlier in 2023, but because it was just an ordinary slim case with nothing else and just the one disc, and it was £25, I balked and I left it. So I got it more recently in HMV's 2 for £25. It's not as good as Jaws in terms of look or sound, because they've kept the original mono sound, doesn't actually need anything else, but the image quality is beautiful from the 35mm original negative. I just don't feel that it's quite as good as Jaws, which was transferred at a higher resolution, which possibly proves the point that 35mm needs to be done more than 4K to get the best out of it. Another controversial release, which if this had been a film, I'd have gone to a cinema to see it on film, but it wasn't. Although I put this on, I looked at it, I thought maybe they did shoot some of this with 35mm, because it looks so filmic, it looks so good. But they didn't. It's all digital video. It looks great. I thought the adventure was great. The CGI of Harrison Ford, mocked up of him playing Indiana Jones as he was in The Last Crusade, I just thought were brilliant. Others you could tell, oh, it's CGI again, you can just tell. It's a shame, but they did recreate an action just like you would have expected from the earlier Indiana Jones films. And then we go to the present, and he's an old curmudgeon, life hasn't been good. And I love that aspect of it. To me, that was exactly how Indiana Jones would have ended up, because it is Harrison Ford, and for me, that was him. And the ending I just thought was perfect. As I said in my review, one of my all-time favourite actresses comes back, and just a wonderful ending to the whole series. Then a while ago, Arrow Films put this one out, but this is the Cult Films release here in the UK, so that suggests to me that Cult Films, I think this is their first 4K release, they've got the rights to this in the UK, Arrow have got it elsewhere, but Arrow have put HDR on their release. there isn't on this. So it'd be interesting for me to get one of those arrows, compare it to this and see if it's really worth it, because to me this looked just like I would expect a master 35mm print to look. Master print comes directly off the camera negative, so it hasn't gone through the inter positive and the inter negative stage to general release print, just goes negative to print, and they use the information worked out on the inter positive to do all the colour grading. Well, this is another one, your own personal 35mm release print, and what a pack, what a first release. I do think not having the HDR label on it probably will hurt it, but it's a great release nevertheless, and for that reason, because it's a lovely pack, I'll put this in as my number 10 of the year. It's going to be interesting to see what other people think about it. I'm not sure how popular it will be. Many people will import the Arrow release from America because that does have HDR, but I think this special pack is rather special, and that's why it's my number 10. And number 9, because well, it's one of the biggest films of all time, and they have done so much work on it to get it looking like this. And, well, what a beautiful cover. Don't think they got this cover in America, but we got it here. I think the Steelbook is now out where you can get it with that on there. But it doesn't seem to look as good to me, but The Exorcist, number 9. And number 8, Deep Impact, simply because I love that film so much, and I'm so pleased to have that in 4K. Number 7, this one won't be popular with a lot of people, but it was such a surprise to me, and how great to have Michael Keaton back as the Batman. Well, let's hope they do something else with him in the future. The Flash. Number 6, The Criterion of After Hours. Another lovely surprise, and what great quality to have on your own home video. Number 5, a beautiful release. Many people don't like the film, but more people tell me they love it than hate it. Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny, another great 4K release. Number 4, without HDR, The Others, and I think that's why it's come so high, because it's proved to me HDR isn't always required after all. Number 3, got to be the most controversial release of the year, American Graffiti, but what a beautiful steelbook. How wonderful to get this great film in such high quality. I know a lot of people don't understand that quality, but hopefully now they understand about Techniscope and fine grain film stock, they'll begin to comprehend how this looks as good as it does, and maybe it's not the excessive image noise reduction that so many people are claiming. Number 2, the best image quality of the year, Oppenheimer. Possibly the best sound too, because the bass in my system, the THX Ultra, just absolutely fantastic. Great image quality, great sound, a great 4K release as you would expect. Absolutely wonderful. And number 1, as I'm sure many of you are expecting by now, because it's such a special release. It was $39.99, and it is The Changeling by Second Sight Films. I just thought this was the most special pack of the year, and that's why it gets my number 1 spot. It's not the best looking 4K disc, it's not the best sounding 4K disc, but just like Get Carter last year, this one I think is the most exceptional overall package of the year. At the end of 2022, I predicted the imminent release of James Cameron's The Abyss. It didn't happen this year, but apparently it is coming out early in 2024. And also the 4K of Aliens, which I think I'm going to have to take a look at. Well, have to take a look at The Abyss, I think. I have these both as feature prints on Super 8. The Abyss, even though it was shot Super 35 and the anamorphic general release prints, well, the release prints were struck from optical blow-ups from that Super 35 to create those anamorphic prints, it looks surprisingly good on Super 8, and that usually, well, every time so far, if it's a good Super 8 feature print, you can expect exceptional 4K disc releases. Aliens does not look so good on Super 8, so it'd be interesting to see. Now, I did see the 70mm blow-up prints of this at the Odeon Leicester Square in 1986. I saw it 3 times. I was rather taken with Aliens, and I do remember that looking very good. So maybe they just used coarser film grain stock for the, well, the 16mm releases perhaps, and also the general release prints. So time will tell. But I think having Aliens to review on 4K will give me a good excuse to get some of my Alien collectibles out and do one of those type of videos. But anyway, I think it's been another great year for home movie releases. I think many people have been predicting the demise of home movies, home video. It doesn't seem to be happening. If anything, it's gaining a pace, and with Disney seemingly coming back into the market, possibly after Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny getting them into a bit of financial difficulty, maybe that will be a good thing for the home movie market too. So let's hope for more in 2024. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give it a like, perhaps consider subscribing. I'll see you next year in whatever comes first. Bye bye for now.